Awesome. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for being here today for a little behind the scenes to the science of the brain boost. Um, a little backstory on this. I did not get into this work to help my focus. That was not something anyone offered me on the menu of reasons one might want to play with one's brain. I actually got into it through singing. Um, and when I found out what it was and what it was doing for me, I did have this sense of like, oh wait, I feel better and I haven't felt good for a really long time. So I'm going to keep pursuing this and see what this is. And it wasn't until like a year and a half into the work, I'd been training a lot, doing tons of drills. I made it my focus that I remember getting ready for this audition and being like, you just packed your bag without any like weirdness. Where packing my bag had always been this thing that I had a hard time doing. Like I'd do it right before I ran out the door, and of course it would make me late. And just without effort, I had packed my bag and put it by the door, and it was no big thing. It's like, oh, interesting. And I started to notice more and more of these things that where I used to have these giant roadblocks, um, I didn't anymore. They were just easy. And I saw that. And I remember Dr. Cobb, who's the founder of Z Health, saying, stick around in Z Health long enough and you watch people change. Like their personalities change, things shift. And so it was really interesting to sort of notice that for myself. And about 2.5 years ago, I was like, I wonder, I wonder if this is a thing we could like do for ADHD people. I had been in an ADHD support group at that point. I was coming face to face with my own ADHD and those moments of like, why was it so hard to pack that bag? Why do I sit and stare at walls? What is this that shuts me down? And I had been diagnosed at 23, but there just medication didn't work. There wasn't anything that was shifting it. So it was just this diagnosis that meant kind of nothing to me. Certainly didn't have any uh, tangible action that I could take. But so 2.5 years ago, I was like, let's try this. And I just as a experiment invited people to come and do a daily brain boost for 15 minutes for 2 months. And at the end of the 2 months, everyone was like, more, 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 more. So it was like this unanimous 100% improvement for everybody that played. And there were people with ADHD, people who didn't have ADHD. It was just this general sense of, gosh, I feel better when I do this. And 2 months was long enough to notice, to have times where people wouldn't come, right? And they'd be like, I feel better on the days that I do this. And so we've been doing this for 2.5 years. Um, and I'm loving inviting new people in and getting a chance to play with it, but it's fast. We're together for 15 minutes, and I don't get a chance to teach the science behind it necessarily. So I've been pretty stoked to put this together. I may have been up a little too late last night playing with AI imaging, but but I am going to share this with you today. We're going to talk about some neural anatomy. You don't have to understand any of this. I think I've made it really simple. I always like to say, humans know this much about brains at this point in time, and I know this much about what we know in the science, and today we're going to talk about this much about what I know about what we know about science. But it's a really useful metric, and these are the thought processes that were kind of guiding me as I was creating the brain boost and the stacks of the drills that we do, and sort of thinking about an ADHD brain and mind, but also knowing that ADHD, one, is just a diagnosis, and two, if it's true for an ADHD brain, it's probably true that this is going to support focus for anybody, and that has been the case. So I'm going to show you some slides. This is way more of a talky talk than I normally give. And then at the end, we're going to check, make sure check, try, recheck makes sense, and make sure there are not any questions before we jump into the focus challenge next week. So yeah, strap in because we're gonna nerd out for a little bit, and then I will make sure we have time to chat and talk about it because that's the fun part. All right, let me share my screen here. All right. And how does one shift? Let's see here. Hold tight. There we go. There's my little carrot. All right. So focus is not a focal point in your brain, right? The executive function, the frontal cortex tends to get all of the press when it comes to focus, but it is a team sport. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit, well, a lot more as we talk about these different members of the team. But yeah, if one part of your brain is not functioning optimally, it can impact absolutely everything. And that frontal cortex in particular is the most vulnerable. So these other team players are a huge role in, they have a huge role in supporting everything to make sure that frontal cortex actually stands a chance. So we're going to kind of walk through these one by one. I'm going to talk about what they do, what happens if they're not functioning optimally, and how we train them in the Brain Boost. So this is your frontal cortex. You can see the yellow up here in the front. The frontal cortex, as I think most of us at this point know, is your executive function branch. It's your CEO. So its role is attention, decision making, inhibition of unwanted thoughts or actions, right? It's your stay on task system. And if things are not functioning optimally, then obviously we're going to be distractive, impulsivity comes out, and that overwhelm, right? Like I just can't hold it all together. And the frontal cortex, like I said, is extremely vulnerable. It is the last, based on feeding and activation patterns in the brain, it is the last part of the brain to receive fuel and activation. Why? Because it's actually not required for survival. So it's a nice to have. Thinking is actually a nice to have. So if I want my thinking part of my brain functioning, I have to make sure that the more survival based part of my brain is functioning optimally. So thinking back to front, right, we're talk about the other parts of the brain that may be draining resources, may be draining activation, and this poor frontal cortex, the CEO, simply does not have the resources to do the job that it is designed to do. Training the frontal cortex, most of us think we pull up our, Wordle games and our Sudoku, if I always say that wrong, but, when we do these brain activation games, and yes, that is using parts of the frontal cortex, but there's so much more that goes on in there, and so much that is imperative for optimal functioning to be able to do those brain games. In the Brain Boost, we do a lot of eye movements. The frontal fields of the visual, the frontal fields for the eyes are actually in the frontal cortex, so that is directly impacting it. Specifically, jumping the eyes has a huge impact on frontal cortex activation. We play with smell. The olfactory bulb is really, really close to the frontal cortex. Areas of the brain that lie near each other, we like to say if they wire together, they fire together. So next door neighbors impact each other. Yeah. Cubicles, next door cubicles in this, I guess, depiction. So we use smell to fire up that frontal cortex. It's unbelievably impactful. And then inhibition drills. So red light, green light kind of concepts, making yourself stop and go, but in a fun, playful way. We're firing up that frontal cortex and getting it awake, provided we have enough resource and fuel on board. Yeah. All right, then we've got the cerebellum. Cerebellum is the little brain that lives at the back of your brain. We like to say it's responsible for the ABCs of movement, and I like to say of thought, accuracy, balance, coordination, and with that coordination is timing. So I've called this one the precision coach. This is your cerebellum is responsible for error correction. And interestingly, for those of you who are interested in the ADHD world, this part of the brain is the one part of the brain that consistently shows up as smaller in size than in non-ADHD brains. The rest of it is somewhat individual and can have different impacts, but the cerebellum consistently is underperforming in those people with ADHD. So that was interesting to me. If it's not functioning correctly, we're going to get messy movements. So if you feel like you're a klutz, might be your cerebellum, discombobulated, disorganized, poor timing. That's a fun one. Movement-wise, poor timing, but also like, do you just say the wrong thing at the wrong time? Like, it's just, that's an interesting one to kind of tie together. Scattered attention, And the looping thoughts for me are a big one because we're going to talk about how to train the cerebellum here. One of the things that we do with training the cerebellum is complex movement. Oops, what happened to that one? Oh no, I lost a slide. Well, we're going to talk through it. The way to train the cerebellum is with complex movement. So circles and figure eights are a great way to activate the cerebellum as opposed to like a linear movement. If I'm just moving my arm up and down, the cerebellum doesn't have to do a ton. It still has to kind of map where it's going. But if I add in a complex movement like a circle or a figure eight, it has to work a lot harder. So I like to say going to the gym and doing those bicep curls for some people may actually be down regulating their cerebellum. We may need more complexity to keep the brain active. And when I translate that into thinking, right, like if my brain is not getting enough complex things to error correct because it wants to work, if that cerebellum's not getting enough activation, it can start to use my thoughts to get the activation. And so I can end up with looping thoughts, right? I see this in my dreams a lot where I get the same dream that happens over the same vignette, just keeps happening, right? That often to me is a sign I need a bit more complex movement in my diet. We can also train balance, so we will add in different balance positions, accuracy and control, right? So again, these, but being really specific with it. And then also adding in the timing piece. Am I hitting the top point on the beat? Am I hitting this point on the beat, right? The more I can create a game of hit the target, the more that cerebellum is getting activated. Yeah? All right. Next up, we have the basal ganglia. The basal ganglia is like your action switch. I don't know, in this scenario, it's your go, no go, right? It's responsible for selecting which action gets executed. It helps inhibit competing actions. And it plays a role in habit formation. It's also the architect of movement. So walking, riding a bike, things that we do without having to think about it anymore because they're so programmed in, that's your basal ganglia. And so this, for me, that's a big one. Like sitting and looking at a list of choices and going, gosh, I just don't know which one I'm supposed to be doing. When it's not functioning optimally, there's even that element of actually, I do know exactly what I'm supposed to be doing and I'm still not doing it. That's a big one. So how do we play with the basal ganglia? Rhythm is a big one. We use rhythm a lot in the brain in the focus group. One, we just listen to it, which is, there are no studies that demonstrate this, but I have plenty of anecdotal evidence at this point to say this actually has a really big impact. And whether or not it's specifically because of the basal ganglia, I don't care. But just listening to rhythm and feeling that beat in the body seems to have a really powerful improvement on inner timing, which for this musician was shockingly bad until I figured that out. I can keep time to a beat. I can dance to a beat. I'm a tap dancer. But but when I have to just hold the beat in my body, and as a singer, like being able to kind of ride the wave and not, if I had a piano player that was riding the wave too, ooh, we were going to end up in the weeds because I didn't have a clue where we were until I started training this and listening to that beat. And I could feel it. I could feel something organizing in my body. So we do that every day in the focus group to ground ourselves in that rhythm and to get this basal ganglia ready to flip that switch when it needs to. So yes, timing is a big one. Novel movement. In the Brain Boost, we constantly are doing new things. Like that's my goal, is to come up with something new every time. Maybe it's adding a slight snap on a movement. Maybe it's looking in a different direction, but stacking different things so that we don't get good at them. So that it stays novel, so that we get some more activation of this basal ganglia. And then just to say walking, we don't walk in the focus group, but because it is that architect of movement, that's a great one for making sure your basal ganglia is getting activated. The parietal lobe. This is our navigator, spatial awareness. It tracks the body in space. It tracks targets moving around. And yeah, it's basically the system that helps you know where you are and what you're interacting with. It's also where your sensory cortex lives, so all sensory information comes in and is processed in the parietal lobe. If this is not working well, and this is another one that shows up in ADHD literature often, which is interesting, we can end up overshooting or undershooting targets, literally like basketball. Like if you have a tendency to miss the mark in that way, oftentimes there's a visual component to that. But also it can be this parietal lobe just not understanding space, can show up as being clumsy, harder to aim your attention, not just basketballs, but thoughts, right? Like, this is what I want I'm going to direct my action over here. Maybe I can get started. Maybe my basal ganglia are working all right, but I'm lost in the weeds, right? That could be your parietal lobe. The way we train it, target-based movement, go play basketball, awesome. But also moving your body, like I said, and hitting a target, that is activating that parietal lobe, sensory stimulation, visual and body coordination, in particular, smooth pursuits, where I'm tracking an object in motion without my head moving is going to impact that parietal lobe. So we do those often. The corpus callosum is the connector. It's literally the fissure down the center of the brain, and it connects the left and the right brain. This is often impacted with ADHD. I often say I am right-left dyslexic, which with Zoom and coaching is amplified. But this left-right confusion, coordination can feel awkward, harder to integrate information coming across, different parts of the brain, different sides of the brain are responsible for different things. And if they can't communicate well, it can feel like we've got traffic, right? It's just not getting through. And things feel slower or less fluid. So that's a juicy one. It's one I target every day in class with cross-body movement. So we'll do some marching, we'll do windmills, we'll do anything that gets the right hand to make contact with the left hip and vice versa, or left leg, left lower body, and vice versa. 25 of those can reset a corpus callosum for a little while. It's pretty great. So we do it every day. Contralateral patterns just to challenge it. And then, coordination challenges. And then the brainstem. Just to say, I'm leaving off a lot of other parts of the brain. It all connects, it's all a part of it. But in terms of these primary ones and the drills that I've chosen, these are the ones I think about the most. The brainstem is your power supply, right? It is your survival part of your brain. And if it's not functioning correctly, then none of these other things are going to. It's responsible for arousal. So if I'm trying to be active and doing something, we need that brainstem, the autonomics need to be functioning. Breathing, and then survival. So again, if there's anything going on here, then that threat bucket is overflowing and we're just going to focus on staying alive. So if this isn't right, nothing else works well. If it's not working, we could feel either foggy with low energy or wired but unfocused, right? We're talking about a balance of parasympathetic and sympathetic activation. It could go either way. Are you strung out, or are you staring at the brick walls? Easily overwhelmed, poor attention stamina. So the ways to train this, we do breath work every day in the focus group. Posture is a really big deal, and I cue it constantly. And then also balance, vestibular inputs. We do tongue work. We do all kinds of things that impact the cranial nerves that go into the brainstem. Jaw work, neck work, all of these things that fire into that brainstem to make sure that that is functioning as optimally as possible. And then I think the pièce de résistance of the focus group is the integration of all of these things. There can be value in targeting those different parts of the brain. And when I'm working with someone one-on-one, that's a really big deal. We want to see if there's an area that needs more activation, get what it needs. For the purposes of focus, because it is this whole brain activity, I want all of these things talking to each other. And when we think about dopamine or norepinephrine, like they're neurotransmitters, what we're really talking about is the communication between these different parts of the brain. So if I get those different parts of the brain to function at the same time, then theoretically I am driving more connections. I'm loading that connection and the brain is going to upregulate. The really cool thing about brains and neuroplasticity, the more I do that, the stronger those connections. So that may be why a year into the work I was doing, I'm suddenly thinking differently, right? Not doing these drills once will not, it gives you an instant boost. A lot of people will say it lasts 2 to 3 hours, but there is a long-term piece to this. The longer I do it, the more my brain understands that this matters and the more it drives those connections. So we're working on the integration by stacking vision drills with movement, with rhythm, with, all of these things. Until like smoke comes out of our ears and we feel like we've got enough activation. Now, how do we know we've got enough activation? This is a very personalized thing. There are some brains that want to win. Like some brains do really, really well, Leanne's nodding, when they hit the target and they know they hit that target. And that is the reinforcement that their brain needs. Some brains like to have smoke coming out of their ears, and that's where they thrive. It's really useful to know these things about yourself, but also really helpful in determining how much challenge your brain actually wants to apply. So in the focus group, because it's a group deal, we start with simple and we add on complexity, and people can stay at whatever level they want. Not because you can't do the complex thing, but because your brain prefers, right, the simple thing. We're talking to our brain. We're driving this conversation with our brain. I will say my ability to do complex things also has drastically improved over the 2.5 years I've been doing this every day, notably. So the drills that were interesting or had smoke coming out of my ears 2 years ago are no longer having that experience. So I need more. So again, we play with the different levels and play with that. Before we jump into the check, try, recheck, I want to stop and just check in with you because that was a lot of neurology with some fun graphics. But I'd love some. Well, thank you all for being here. I'm really looking forward to next week. Those of you watching the recordings, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. But yes, we will be meeting 9 to 9:15 Pacific AM, Monday to Friday next week. And hopefully we'll have a rocking, awesome week because of it. All right. Take care. Bye.